All right. I'm going to dive into 202 and tell you what I thought. I kind of have to be quick about this. I'm not saying it's going to be a short video. It'll probably be long like last week's, but I actually have a very busy weekend this week. My church is having a conference that goes all weekend, and I have all these sessions to attend. And don't get me wrong, it's not a drag. I love it, but it just leaves less time for Walking Dead stuff. So I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as I could. And I don't mean to say that I want to get through it. It's great. This episode was fantastic. It had a lot of stuff in it for us to go over. So like I said, we're just going to dive in without further ado. So we start almost right at the beginning with this voiceover from Laurent. Okay, guys, this voiceover is very, 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 very reminiscent of Beth's voiceover in Inmates, okay? It's practically the same thing. I mean, Beth's was her diary entry and Laurent's is a prayer, but in a lot of ways, when you think energetically, those things are very, very, very similar. But more than that, what he says is similar, right? He talks about hoping that he can have a home, hoping to be the person everyone wants him to be, but also the person that he wants to be. Already, there is a lot of people, in our fandom talking about how similar this is to what Beth said. And I do think it is going to tie into the 6th episode. I mean, especially because these episodes have leaked and a lot of us have watched them. I will say I still have not watched them beginning to end, but I've seen so many of the spoiler clips that have been put out. I think I've seen the most important parts too, so it's very much coming together for me. It is really important. And it's just, this is so exciting because it just goes to show that what they wrote down, or I shouldn't say wrote down, what they wrote in the show and planned, such that Beth did that voiceover in Inmates, like what it represented and what they were going for there, is still in play. This is a long, long, long game, okay? And what we're realizing now is that what she said in that voiceover, it's really not clear, or it hasn't been up till now, how that's playing into her arc. Because it's not like we had something obvious at Grady or in Coda that went, oh, that's what that means in Inmates. No, we still don't really know what it means or what they were thinking about. But because Laurent's is so similar, and as we get toward the end of the season of Daryl Dixon season 2, it's going to become a lot more clear. And that's just exciting because it just goes to show that that is still in play. It has not gone anywhere. They're replaying it here through Laurent. Everybody, it's almost become a cliche already, even though we're only 2 episodes in, for everyone in our fandom to be like, okay, this is clearly leading to Beth, but it is very clearly leading to her. So I'm not going to go over too much what he actually said. You guys will pull that out of the episode itself, and you guys are very good at this. Everyone knows exactly what we're looking for here, but there are just a lot of parallels to what Beth said. Pay attention especially to talking about wanting a safe place, talking about there's a big home thing going on, which we know is a lot more about family than it is about location. But it's also very significant that Beth said that right after the prison fell. And so she's talking about having wanted the prison to be their home and their safe place and to stay there forever. Remember, that's why at the time, it just seemed really sad. It seemed ironic because we had seen the prison fall 2 episodes before that, and we're watching Beth and Daryl literally run for their lives in Inmates. And then, when they finally fall down in the field and you see the birds, which look very much like buzzards, which are a representation of death because they are carrion who eat, they're scavengers, right? You hear her say, we can stay here for the rest of our lives. And everyone just went, oh, that's sad, because it went down and they can't stay there. But it was so much more than that. And we're starting to see now that it was very much going to inform her arc, and yes, Daryl's arc. I mean, they're both in the beginning of Inmates, so it's not just her. She's the one saying it, but it's also very not obvious, right? It's not an external arc. We're not talking about it informing Grady or the fact that she was taken or the fact that she was shot. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about very emotional internal stuff. So we'll get to that more as we go throughout the season. I don't want to give massive spoilers for the end of the season, even though I know that I have some videos where I've talked about them, but I will always give a spoiler warning if I'm going to talk about anything beyond the episode that we just saw. So I'm going to try to keep it to episode 2 today. But I just also want you guys to start ruminating on how Laurent is like Beth and how many similarities there are and will continue to be throughout the season between him and her, and even in their external arcs, okay? We then see Laurent give Daryl a dog that he has carved, so clear, serious symbolism here. I don't think I need to go into that too much. And Galadriel Jones has a whole theory that I'm assuming she's going to write out at some point about the book that the dog is sitting on top of. It's a French philosophy book, and it's super important too. It's a big hint. So just pay attention to things like that. So then we see Daryl teaching Laurent baseball, which I thought was a completely adorable scene. And then he and Isabel talk, and this is when he asks her to go with him, and she's really not sure that she wants to, as she really rejects it at first. Then we see more about Losang talking about moving up the ceremony and that people need proof. We do figure out by the end of the episode what this is, and it's kind of what we thought might be the case. They're going to try and prove that he is immune to the virus, but to do that, they're going to have him be bitten. And that's really not a good idea, because if they are wrong, he's going to die. So yeah, that's a pretty brutal thing to do, really. And Losang clearly thinks he's doing the right thing and trying to hold people together, but yeah, he's just another, we see this a lot on The Walking Dead, we see just a misguided leader. I mean, after watching this, I think Losang is actually a lot like Dawn in that they're trying to show us that overall he's not evil, but, I mean, he's not evil even in the way Jeanette is evil, at least not that we've seen yet, but he's just very misguided in what he's doing, and it's like, dude, that is not a good idea, stop that right now, you know? So that's kind of where we're at with Losang. And the other woman, and I wrote down her name, I want to say Jacinda, or Jacinta, let me see if this is in my notes. She's the woman that Losang keeps talking to about the ceremony, moving it up, getting proof, all of that. And I think I wrote her name down somewhere, but now I'm not finding it. Anyway, whoever she is, she is afraid that their people are tired of waiting, and then they're going to start either giving up or rising up against Losang if they don't have some kind of proof, which is interesting. I don't know if she's right about that. I'll be interested to see if she is. Like, on the one hand, maybe that shows that these people are less in control than we think they are. Like, they seem like they're very down to earth. It's a great community, like Alexandria. They're working together and everything's pretty peaceful. Maybe it's not. Maybe under the surface it's more like, remember Devon in Tales of the Walking Dead, how that whole community turned into like a Salem witch trial sort of situation? That's kind of what Jacinta is saying, that's going to happen if they don't get proof. But on the other hand, Jacinta might be mistaken about that. Maybe she's just saying that or just thinking that, and that's not at all the case. I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see where it goes. All right, so then we switch to Ash and Carol. They land the plane in Greenland. Now, we have already, several people, bloggers and things have already talked about this in great detail. Obviously, Greenland immediately made us think of Beth. And one thing that I do want to point out that's just kind of fun that occurred to me. So way back in season 3, on Morgan's walls, there was something that said green root. And our fandom has been pointing to that as a Beth thing for a long time. Then it's actually very subtle in Consumed, but they actually do follow a green route to find her, and they don't draw attention to it. They never go, oh, let's follow this green line. Nothing like that. But if you look at where they're going when they're running through the city, in the background, it's like an arrow that's painted on the wall, like you get on concrete to show you where to go in, like stadiums or in like parking lots that have like a million different lanes, how they'll paint arrows on the ground to show you which way to go. It's like that. It's on the wall, and it's a green, long line that has arrows on it. And they actually have that in the background of Consumed a lot. And like I said, they do not draw attention to it. They never focus on it with the camera. You have to look for it. But I think that is symbolically saying this is the green route. This is the route they're going to find Beth. And they do eventually find her at Grady. So Greenland, I feel like this is another representation of that. This is the green route. This is how they're going to find Beth eventually, right? And it's already been said that this little let's call it a side mission, since I was going on and on about that last week, about how they kept calling Beth and Daryl a side mission in season 4. This little side mission of Carol and Ash when they go to Greenland, it does absolutely nothing to move the plot forward, other than there's a leak in the fuel line and Ash fixes it, but obviously they could have just cut that out and said there was not a leak in the fuel line. That was not necessary for the plot. So when that happens, usually it means that it's highly symbolic. Now, once again, well, I will get to that in just a minute. Let's see. Try to stick with my notes here and not go completely off the rails here. She and Ash get there. The plane needs to be repaired because there's a leak in the fuel line. And when the walkers approach, there's like 3 of them. They're covered in greenery, which is another symbol we could look at. But then, of course, they come up from the ground and grab Carol until she's in trouble, which is a very obvious resurrection symbol of them coming up out of the ground as though they're coming up out of their graves. She shoots a couple of them in the eye, which is also serious symbolism. And then the last one is shot when the 2 women show up to help them. So then it goes back to the nest, and I will come back to Greenland in just a minute. Sylvie's cutting Emil's hair. He's clearly upset, and you don't know why right then he's upset. Poor Sylvie. I feel bad for Sylvie. This is where we actually see the baseball scene, and they talk. I'm sorry, I'm just going through my notes here. And then in the morning, after the baseball scene, Isabel goes to find Laurent, and he is gone. And so they all jump in the cars to go find him. And still, Emil is really, really upset. And it's a little bit disturbing. It's a little worrying. You're going, okay, what is up with this kid? Now, originally, I was mad that they cut his curls. They gave him like this crew cut, and I was like, oh, they cut off his curls. I liked his curls. But it kind of becomes a little bit more obvious why they did that later on. But anyway, that scene ends with all of them going to find Laurent. And also, it was interesting that Lo Sang didn't want Isabel to go. There's really no reason for her not to go, even though, I mean, I don't know, I suppose you could call him a sexist, or he was just worried about her, but she came in with Daryl and Laurent, so clearly she has some idea how to survive on the outside, so it was a little bit odd for him to tell her that he didn't want her to go. All right, so then we return to Carol and Ash. Now, I know that these have been pointed out by other people who have seen the episode, but we're still going to go through them. And there's a few that I haven't heard mentioned as well. So they talk about and I'm probably not going to say this right, I'm so sorry, Tupalag, which is their name for walkers, but it's based on a legend that they have. And I've not looked deeply into that. I also wonder if there's more symbolism in that, but I will have to look into that, and if there is, I'll talk about it later in the week. But here we go. First of all, one of the women is named Hannah. Now, this is really, really important, guys. We have actually seen 2 other Hannahs in the show, and one of them is really not obvious. Well, okay, let's be, actually, neither of them is terribly obvious except to us. The first one that I would always think of is that in the coda of Coda, so in the little after the credits thing with Morgan in Coda, he goes to the school where Father Gabriel was, where all the walkers broke out, and he finds that magazine that has Hannah Fairlight on it. And there's Native American symbolism there, there's wolf symbolism, it's all very, very Beth, right? And her name is Hannah. So we actually have a callback here by this woman being named Hannah. We have a callback to Coda, to the Coda of Coda, where Morgan found that magazine. That is also where we see the magazine that says Top 44. And the reason that's important, it's like Top 44 music chart or something like that. Well, it's music, so that's important. But also episode 44, or I'm sorry, not episode, comic book issue 44 is where Andrea was shot in the head and survived. So that was always a really big clue to us that Beth was going to survive this gunshot wound. Anyway, so just having this woman be named Hannah is a callback to that. The other Hannah is one that is actually not spoken in the show, but for those of you who are really diehard, because I always forget this, one of my fellow theorists reminded me, and I'm like, man, I've heard that before, but I always forget that. Bicycle Girl, which is the first walker that Rick sees in the park, you know, when he comes out of the hospital, he's still wearing his hospital gown, and then he sees Bicycle Girl, which is just, she doesn't have legs, right? Her name is Hannah. They've told us that. So what does that mean? Well, I've already explained that it's a callback to Coda, but I also think it's a callback to, I mean, obviously the pilot episode, but in that episode, Rick wakes up from his coma. He's making his way out of the hospital. He's brand new to the world. And I think there's something here that's telling us it's about Beth being paralleled with Rick and with his arc because she's the new sheriff, you know? So this is really, really a big deal because we have seen other repeated names in the show, and I always make note of them because I know they're always done purposefully. But we don't see a lot of Hannah. You know, we've only seen those 2, and now we have this woman. So just that alone tells me that this is some sort of callback to a lot of things that have a lot to do with Beth, specifically the episode Coda and the Coda of the episode Coda. Then I thought this was interesting too. Carol makes this Shakespeare reference, right? Because they're explaining why they call walkers after this legend, and you can tell Carol thinks it's a little weird, but she goes, well, you know, whatever, I guess Rose by any other name. And of course, that is a very famous Shakespeare reference. And where does it come from? It comes from Romeo and Juliet. A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So this tells you that we are referencing a love story here, but of course, Romeo and Juliet ends tragically, and I think that could definitely be informing, like, or a callback, I guess I should say, to the way Beth and Daryl's story ended in season 5, which is not to say it will end that way for good, but just in season 5. Hence the also callbacks to Coda. But also it's a foreshadow that these two women are probably, it's not going to end well for them. They're going to end much like Romeo and Juliet did. But I thought that was a really interesting reference. It stuck out to me because we don't hear very many direct Shakespeare references in the show. And we don't really hear them from Carol at all. So that really jumped out at me. Okay. Then they get to the little dwelling that these two women live in. And we have the home sweet home reference. Once again, big callback to season 4. Now, I also will say that we had an episode called Home Sweet Home in season 10. And all kinds of theories batted around about why it was called that. I want to say that was the episode where they mentioned Beth's name, where Maggie mentioned Beth's name. So either way, it was clearly a callback to Beth, but I'm going to have more information about that tomorrow. Let's just say that I do not have the time to talk about this today, but something that was a small detail in this part, it actually has to do with Ash's plane, the fuel line leaking, made me start thinking about something in season 10, and I had this complete light bulb moment. It does have to do with Beth. It sort of indirectly has to do with Beth, but it's still really important, and at the end of the day, it just shows us very, very clearly that it's leading to her. So I will get that video up either tomorrow or Tuesday. Like I said, I'm just a little short on time, so I'm going as fast as I can, but I did have a big breakthrough. So anyway, I won't talk too much about that here, but Home Sweet Home is just definitely a Beth and Daryl reference. Then we get inside. Okay, it just keeps going. Like every other minute, we've got a Beth reference here. We find out that they are cooking reindeer stew. We could look at that two different ways. One is that it's the deer symbolism. We always say when the deer lives, someone else dies. When the deer dies, someone else lives. And it's kind of not here nor there in this particular case because we have two people that die and two people that live. So it's like, okay, who is this symbolism applying to? Obviously, Carol and Ash live, but the two ladies, Hannah and, what is her name? Yoon, I think is how you say it. Neither of them live. But I think because it's reindeer and not just deer, I actually think it's a Christmas reference as well. And, of course, we had the reference to Santa Claus in Still. So just another callback to Still. They were making their own aquavit, which is basically moonshine, only like Scandinavian moonshine, right? So we have that. We also have, I almost want to say that, I do want to say it, that these two women are actually representative of Beth and Daryl in Still, well, maybe in Alone, in Still and Alone, let's just call it in season 4. But as we often see, it's a very toxic, twisted representation of them because it's kind of a toxic relationship. We can very clearly see that Hannah is more of the submissive one and Yoon is very much the domineering one, but it doesn't seem like it's terribly healthy. It actually seems just a little bit abusive, which, clearly it's not a really great relationship. But what really jumped out at me, not only is that they split up and they're both doing their separate things, and of course all these references, but they very specifically talked about how they didn't really want to leave, or at least Hannah was obviously open to it and she tries to leave with Carol, but she says Yoon would not be willing to leave this place. So it just reminded me of Daryl and Beth, like, thinking about setting down roots and staying there. So, like I said, it's definitely a very twisted version of Beth and Daryl, but it is there. And then, like I said, with all of the other callbacks and symbols, you just kind of can't get away from those. Between the two, because Hannah was a little more easygoing, she was a little bit sweeter, she was very reluctant to kill Carol. I think she would be representing Beth, which makes sense because she's Hannah, which is from Coda. The other lady would represent Daryl, although, again, I'm not saying Daryl was all murderous like she was or anything. It's a twisted representation. But we do have Yoon is the one who says, I think it's beautiful to Ash, which was actually a Beth line. So, maybe it goes back and forth. And then at one point she hugs Ash, which just felt like the alone hug. But interestingly, it was opposite in the sense that she hugged him from the front in like a normal frontal hug rather than the back. And maybe it was probably done purposefully to show that this is a twisted version. It's not an exact, it's like an anti-parallel, right? Okay, so we learned that Hannah is supposed to kill Carol, and Ian is supposed to get Ash to donate his sperm, which was kind of awkward. If you ask me, poor Ash, he probably was feeling really awkward. Needless to say, we did not see this in Still and Alone. Beth did not ask Daryl to give her sperm. But we do have two different serious references here. First, he says, are you serious? And then he says, you're not serious. So very clear serious references. Then Yoon comes in and tries to kill Carol because Hannah can't do it. Hannah kills her. Like I said, we have the star-crossed lovers thing. It's just not going well. Carol says that they can still take Hannah. And I really wonder if Carol was planning to do that or if she was always planning to double-cross Hannah. I honestly don't know. She didn't get the chance because Ash shot her. So anyway, I thought it was an interesting scene. And I do understand why people are saying that it didn't have much... that it seems useless to anybody who isn't in on the symbolism. We did have, it seems like we had more than one, and I'm not sure I wrote them all down, but we had a couple of lucky references to luck. And just remember that Beth talked to Edwards about being lucky at Grady. Personally, it seems to me that the way that they always talk, what they specifically mean when they use the word luck or you're lucky, is that you've been lucky enough to have someone who was willing to keep you alive even if you couldn't have managed it yourself. So often, like we heard it said to Spencer, Rick said it to Spencer and everybody hated Spencer, So it's kind of, they actually said it in 5B. I think Rick and Daryl talked about it too. Rick said Alexandria was lucky that they'd gotten there. And it's because the Alexandrians didn't really know how to survive on their own, but now Rick's group is there and can not only protect them, but teach them how to survive. You see what I mean? Anyway, but Hannah told Carol that Ash was lucky to have her. The other thing is that when they get to the plane, I kind of figured when Yoon came back that she had either knocked Ash unconscious or tied him up or something because they said they didn't want to kill him, not until at least they're both pregnant and maybe more than once pregnant, so they're not really planning on killing him. But he also wasn't with her, so I was like, okay, she hit him over the head or something. When they got back to the plane, he was actually handcuffed to the plane. And so that's another thing that we've seen a lot. He was a prisoner, I guess you could say. And yeah, these two, from a very not Beth and Daryl perspective, they reminded me of Amazon women or something. I almost wonder if they would have, once they were done with Ash, assuming they had gotten what they wanted, if they had killed Carol, if they had, gotten Ash to impregnate them, if they would have, killed him and eaten him afterward or something. They just seemed that way to me. I was like, oh, these ladies, okay. Anyway, is there anything else from this part? Let's see. We do learn Carol helps him, get out of the cuff, and then they take off, and we learned that this was the first time he had ever killed a person, so that was kind of disturbing for him. So the only other thing I want to say is that, this was clearly full of Beth symbolism and a lot of things, and I'm sure we'll find more nuances the more we watch it. I've actually only watched the episode once at this point, so I will probably find more. But I also like to, as you know, look at the overall sequences. I'm not 100% solid on my interpretation of this one yet, but the basic gist of what I'm thinking is that the plane, okay, so we have the plane and it had a fuel leak, right? So you could almost see the plane as being injured as far as an aircraft goes when they landed and they had to fix it. A plane also obviously takes you from one place to another. It's a type of transportation. So we've wondered before if the plane and the car symbolism are synonymous or at least very similar. So I feel like you could almost see the plane as Beth being injured in a car, being taken somewhere, and she had to be patched up in the same way. Because, the one thing is that he did get, I think it was just duct tape to duct tape the fuel line and fix it that way. And he did get that from Hannah and Yoon. So if that is the interpretation we're supposed to be going with here, I'm not sure exactly what it means. Is it pointing towards something that happened during the missing 17 days that we don't have yet? I don't know. But once they land, we have all of these Beth and Daryl callbacks and symbols and dialogue parallels, right? The other thing I was thinking, though, is that maybe it's not supposed to be literal, as in they're telling us about something that happened during the missing 17 days. To me, I kind of almost see it like this. If the plane represents Beth, okay, she's hurt, as in she got shot in Coda, so she's hurt very badly. And you could see the fuel leak as synonymous to her, I don't know, leaking blood from the wound in her head. And when they land, we have this massive, massive representation of Beth and Daryl in season 4. And they had what was needed to fix that wound. So the way I would love to interpret it, because it would be very romantic, is if what they're really trying to say here is that Beth's experiences with Daryl in season 4 are what kept her alive somehow. And it might not be literally medically alive, but it's what gave her the, emotional, psychological, spiritual ability to go on and to actually survive her wounds and live to see another day and to keep fighting and to keep going. And then what happens after they fix the plane? They go to Europe. And we're all thinking at this point that Beth may be in Spain. If she doesn't show up in this season, then chances are she's in Spain. So then that would also be another parallel that at some point she ended up in Europe. And so after the plane is fixed here, they head to Europe. You see what I mean? So that's kind of how I'm seeing that right now. That may change over time as we learn more. But I thought it was a really interesting sequence. I had a lot of fun with all of the callbacks and everything. So then we return to Daryl, and they're tracking Laurent. Sylvie, meanwhile, notices that the cook in the kitchen, is preparing Laurent's meal, which is odd to her. So she follows and finds that Laurent is still there with Lo Sang, and it was all a big setup to get Daryl to leave. Then some of the men from the nest actually turn on Daryl and Isabel's group and attack them, and Emile is part of the attack. So now we understand why he was so sad. He was very grim about what he was going to have to do. And what I said about them cutting his hair, I really feel like they were trying to make him look more like a villain. They were trying to make him look more severe, almost Nazi-ish. And they did kind of accomplish that. So it was too bad that Emile took part in that. He did say that they made him watch while they experimented on others and killed others. So that did mess him up psychologically. So that's something to take into account. But what happened was just very tragic. I did catch the Tomorrow theme in here. Did you guys catch that? So for anyone who hasn't heard me talk about it, I first picked up on the Tomorrow theme in All Out War. They kept saying things like, tomorrow the war is going to be here. Tomorrow this is going to happen. Tomorrow we're going to have to do that. And I was going, no, this is a theme. They keep saying that. And then that was not the first time they said it. They've said it other times in the series, but that was just the first time I picked up on it. And I always just think it's a foreshadow of coming events that are maybe outside this current arc. So we always thought that the Tomorrow theme was maybe a foreshadow of the CRM war, and it may still be if there is still a war with the CRM. But if not with them, then it's a foreshadow of the big war that's going to come eventually, after Beth shows up and after everybody kind of reunites, and, it's just like a bigger conflict sometime in the future. But in this case, Emile says it, and he's talking about the ceremony. He says tomorrow they're going to do the ceremony. Tomorrow they will prove that Laurent is special, by biting him. Which makes me think that this is actually a foreshadow of the cure, or the cure theory, whatever it ends up being. Tomorrow, at some point, we're gonna find out if there is a cure, if there is anybody who's immune, and it's just sort of a foreshadow of that's coming. It won't happen this season in this particular arc, but this is just a foreshadow of something beyond the particular story they're telling here in season 2. And then Isabel does end up shooting Emile. So again, poor Sylvie. I feel bad for her, but things got messy. All right, so then Carol and Ash get to France. They land on a horse race track. When Carol first said that, she said it was a racetrack. I'm thinking in my head a car racetrack, and I didn't realize till they landed that it was a horse racetrack. And horses have been used in interesting ways. There's an episode that I think I've mentioned recently in season either 10 or 11, I can't remember now, where they used... It was the one where Carol ended up killing a horse to feed everybody because they didn't have any food and there were the wild horses. And there's just a lot of symbolism there that's intertwined with Beth. Of course, we have Buttons the horse, and the way that Daryl talked to the horse and interacted with the horse was very much about Beth. And then we had Rick riding a white horse just before he disappeared into the CRM. And we already know from the trailer that Carol will be riding a white horse at some point. So this was probably actually something of a foreshadow of Carol riding that horse, but there's also a lot of symbolism going on there. So Ash wants to go with her. She wants him to stay with the plane. He says he'll have to get fuel for the plane, and she says she'll be back in 2 weeks, if not before. Oh, this is the other good luck reference. He says bonne chance, which is French for good luck, and she heads into Paris. She does see a truck. It's one of Jeanette's trucks, and she takes an apple. So we definitely have some apple symbolism going on here. It's a red apple, but remember that especially a red paired with a green apple, the red can mean death, but the red and the green together can mean resurrection. But it also very specifically has to do with two people who care about each other being separated and then eventually being reunited. So because it's red, I'm not at all worried that one of them is going to die or anything. I don't know. I suppose you could... extend that to Isabel, but since she wasn't actually in the scene and we haven't seen her eat an apple, I don't think that would necessarily apply to her. I think it's more about Carol and Daryl's separation, and, you know, they're about to come back together, so I think it has more to do with that. But she cuts a hole in one of the grain bags so that she can follow the truck, and then finds this place where Jeanette is giving people food, and she offers 20 people places at the Maison Mère, and then, of course, Carol ends up being captured. So then we have the kiss scene, right? Falou, Daryl, and Isabel get to the nest, but the tide is in. And so Falou kind of conveniently says he will go put together a perimeter so that they're alone. And then we have the kiss. I don't think I really have much more to say about the kiss that I haven't already said. It still doesn't bother me. It's very clear that this is a Zach thing. It's a mirror to Beth and Zach. And that is probably the reason why they had him kiss her at all. I was going to say something else and I lost my train of thought. I know I forgot to do it last week. I might actually put it on the end of this video. I want to record the episode Insider for you guys because they actually have a really funny story about the kiss scene where it was windy and Daryl's hair kept getting in the way. And the first thing I thought was, oh, Daryl's hair is a Bethelor. It doesn't want him to kiss her. And they just have some fun stories in it this week. But anyway, the kiss just, it is what it is. And like I said, I'm just not that worried about it. So then we switch to Jacinta and Losang, and she tells Losang that basically she told the men from the nest to kill Daryl, and he is not at all happy about that. He's very upset. And he says, is this who we are? Is this who we really want to be? Direct callback to Beth and Dawn at Grady, when Beth says, I'm forgetting the first part of it now. She says, you keep saying it's going to be this way just until it's over, but it isn't over. This is who you are, and this is who you are until the end. So it's the same kind of argument about who they want to be, and, you know, they can justify this all they want in their circumstances, but it still says a lot about them that this is who they're going to be, right? And so that's what Losang is saying, which is another way in which he's a lot like Dawn. He's just not sure that he's okay with Jacinta doing this. But she does say that it's just Daryl, it's not... You know, they weren't supposed to kill Isabel or Falou, but little do they know that all their guys were taken out and Daryl and Isabel are not too far away. They're just waiting to come back in. So then we switch to Jeanette and her right-hand lady, and we see that she is torturing Caudron for information, which he is not giving her. We do have a wine reference there. I don't know. I didn't read too much into what Jeanette was saying. She talked about her mother being a waitress, and there is a wine reference there. But I don't know. I kind of went through that part pretty quickly. Maybe I need to look into it more. Then we have Carol in the back of the truck. She meets a man named Remy who speaks English, and he was separated from his husband, who was put in the other truck. And I actually think that we see that right before we see the Jeanette thing. So it's pretty clear by the sequence that I actually thought this when they were loading people into the cars. They actually had an older man as well. He was like white haired and was kind of stumbling. And I just thought, well, it's a little bit weird that they're willing to take the elderly. You wouldn't think that someone like Jeanette, I mean, not that I think this is right or anything, but you would think she would much prefer to take people who were young and healthy rather than the elderly. Like, just as brutal as she is and as much of a villain as she is, you would think she would be one that would not believe in taking care of the elderly. So I thought that was interesting. But then when the truck turns off, I mean, and then we go to Jeanette in the place where they do the experiments and torturing Caudron, I think it's pretty obvious that they specifically took some of people that they would consider to be weaker, and it's probably that they're going to do experiments on them or turn them into Walker Chow or something like that, you know. So, yeah, it's not a good situation, but we didn't really see any more of that. But, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the gist of what happens this episode. Other than learning what was going on with Laurent, there wasn't a whole lot that was really big that happened in this episode, but a couple of other things that they say in the episode Insider. They did say that the place where Daryl and Isabel went looking for Laurent, where the Nest people turned on them, was actually a mill, and they said that like it was a grain mill or something, but they were using that sort of as a parallel, if you will, to the fact that this episode is called Moulin Rouge. Yeah, I kind of have to call BS on that a little bit. I mean, it's cool that they used a mill and that they were thinking about it like that, but there's no way that the title isn't more significant than that. I tried to do a little bit of research on the actual Moulin Rouge in Paris, and nothing was really jumping out at me, or it's not in Paris, it's in Montmartre, I think. Don't quote me on that. It's not in Paris, but it's somewhere in France. And it is really, it was a place where there's a lot of historical things that happened, that it's kind of seen as the birth of the can-can dance. And now it's still very musically inclined, but it's mostly a tourist attraction now. So I don't know if that plays into, you know, why they used it, other than the fact that it's very music-oriented. But I still think that it has a lot to do with Moulin Rouge, the film, and the fact that it's a love story. And I did get asked whether that could be about Daryl and Isabel, because we already know she's going to die by the end of the season. I'm still reluctant to say that. I mean, and it's really not because I don't want to say that Daryl's in love with Isabel. I mean, to me, it's clear that he's really not. I think he does love her. I think he does care about her, but I don't think he's passionately in love with her. But that's not why it bothers me. The reason it bothers me to say that that's about Daryl and Isabel is because in Moulin Rouge, it was a ride or die, love of your life, soulmate sort of situation. And to me, when they've so clearly told us that that is not what Isabel is to Daryl, to use the Moulin Rouge, the film, as symbolism of Daryl and Isabel, that would just almost be like lazy writing to me. Like lazy, not even lazy writing, lazy symbol usage. You know? That phrase is only going to make sense to TDers. So overall, and I will hit on this, if I remember, tomorrow when I talk about Diverged, I do think it still has to do with Beth and Daryl. And that may seem goofy because, you know, we didn't have Beth in this episode at all. But that's not the point. This sequence is very much, and when I say this sequence, I mean like pretty much everything that's happening this season. Of course, it's a callback to Beth and Daryl. Of course, we're getting a lot of things that are returning to season 4 and season 5, as we've all been pointing out. But it's more than that. The whole sequence is a replay that is leading up to Beth. And so I did a video some time ago. I will link it in the show notes about the titles. And all of the titles were very suspicious in that they seem to have to do with Beth's symbolism, and obviously she's not going to be in any of these episodes. So I don't think that the Moulin Rouge title has to do with Isabel just because they kissed in this episode. I think it has to do very much with Beth, but like I said, I will get into that more tomorrow when I talk about My Big Breakthrough and Diverged. So that is pretty much what I have. I will try to get you the episode Insider. And like I said, I have some other things to talk about that are kind of adjacent to this. So, and I didn't have a lot of time this weekend, so I will get to them as the week goes on, and I will get to more of your asks. But let me know what you guys thought of the episode, and if you caught any callbacks or Beth symbolisms that I missed, please let us know. And yeah, other than that, it was a great episode. I really, really enjoyed it, and I am looking forward to next week's.